We'll go. Okay, so thanks for joining us for this part two, and of course, thanks for participating in part one with us today. So the second half here today is going to be a little bit about the packaging strategies. Now, since most of us are the same team from this morning, it looks like there's not many new. We're going to skip these first few slides since it's the same group as this morning. But so what are the outcomes for this section here, this part two? So today at this point, we're going to start to identify some packaging strategies for your content, for your course and course delivery. We're going to chat about some storyboarding methods, ways to sort of visualize how you can, yeah, this is the right room for part two. Yeah, thanks. How we can visualize some of your planning, especially when it comes to, yeah, designing your modules and holding the packaging and sharing in mind. We will showcase some examples of content that others have done. We've done some other projects in previous years funded by the ministry, administered through eCampus Ontario. So we actually can showcase some of the things that we've seen before to give you some ideas of how you might work with your content for this online and open and shareable content. And we'll wrap up with some additional technical considerations for sharing in this context. So this we'll begin with the packaging and sharing strategies. And at the end of this segment, oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I'm looking at Martina's notes in the chat here, Lori, which I think the link emails for another session. Oh, interesting. What? Link. Maybe what I'll do is I'll rejoin from the calendar. Yeah, maybe I'll reply all and send again. Let me just do this real quick. All right, sorry, I'm just looking at some of the chats in the text here, and I just want to be sure we get everybody in. So I've just sort of forwarded the link to the group. So apologies for those in here while we just get some other of our colleagues in. But yeah, at the end of this segment, we'll look at some different strategies for packaging the course content. We'll look at a high-level storyboard, and we'll compare some various approaches to things like video and interactive content that you might do and use. So to begin this section, again, so we're all here because we're creating a suite of modules that are going to be packaged up as a course. We're sharing courses out through this virtual learning strategies. And we basically want to look at, you know, how does this nest? How does this work? How do you want to share this content? So we're at the top level, of course, at the course level. But how does it look then when we're designing and working with our modules? You know, are you going to work through these in a weekly fashion? Are you going to focus on units? And as we dig down to the learning objects, those content pieces in our learning, how are you going to look at those? How are you going to structure those? So basically what we want to do here is help you find ways to package this content for sharing from the learning object up to the course level. And the main two things, so the eCampus Ontario is providing a library for us to upload our content in. We have meetings coming up with eCampus on what that's going to look like, so we can't tell you quite yet. But you know, we are anticipating common standard formats to be able to share it in this library. And two of the main that we expect or suspect most of you will probably look to are building things out in Quarkus. You actually build your course out in Quarkus, in Canvas, and actually export that whole piece. The file type is IMSCC for eCampus Ontario's library. So other people can come in and just download that and import it into their own course shell, whether it's Blackboard or Desire to Learn or what have you. So that's one way that we might approach this. Another way we might approach this is basically providing an asset library, all the pieces of the course, the video links, the readings, the PowerPoints, in a zip file. For people to use, and we'll discuss and show what this might look like. So those are probably the two main file content format types that we'll probably be exploring to share our course content. As a side note related to this, we also, Lori and I, OLS, have an OpenU Toronto site that's meant for sharing and adding eyes on these projects to showcase them. So they will be showcased on our OpenU Toronto site. What we're hoping to provide is a landing page, a little blurb about your project, and we'll share some examples of this with links to these downloadable files or pointing to eCampus Ontario Library. We will link to and point to your local department hosting if preferred, and if it's available for your content. We will note that we are not hosting the full project assets here. We in OLS don't have the capacity or the file sizes to host all of these project assets. Basically, it's a showcase site to point to the assets at other locations. It's a great entry point for sharing out. So yeah. But let's look at the two main examples here and how this might look for your context. And the first example is actually is a project from a couple of years ago, mathematics skill development. This was done through UTSC. And again, it was packaged for the learning management system. They built it, and you might see from the image here, this is actually 3 years back. This was built actually in Blackboard at the time. But they built it in the course. They built out the course as they normally would for your U of T teaching context. And of course, within, you can create modules and pages and all your various items, your text, your video, your quizzes. Naturally, they all flow through that course management system. And the course can be exported in a common cartridge format for use in other LMSs. So if I let me take a pause to go out and show you a couple of these examples. So first of all, the sharing site I was talking about is OpenU Toronto. The OpenU Toronto VLS materials are also on this page, but we have a projects page for all of our different textbooks, modules, and innovation projects. And this is something that will work with you for your project as well. Of course, you have courses. These are open modules from previous sessions. But, we have little pages that point to the full basically the gateway, the showcase of the project. So this one here, the mathematics skills development, we created a page with them. They actually provided a little video to introduce people to what this is all about, which is a very great strategy. And we'll delve into some of the pros and cons of both of these strategies for building out in a LMS for export or providing an asset library. But what they've got here is they have a little bit of a guide that talks about what the modules within contain in this suite of modules, the list of modules, and of course the downloads. So basically, what they've got here is they built it out in Blackboard at the time, and a person can download the whole common cartridge to import into their own course. And what they've done here is they've provided a bit of guidance around what the modules contain. Again, we all here in this meeting are providing a full course, a full suite of modules, a full suite of units for a course. So yours might be a little bit more involved, but it might follow a similar structure and a similar pattern. And it's probably the most common way that we're probably looking at sharing content. The second way might be an asset library. An example from engineering is engineering drawings, and they have several on our website. In this case, it's a series of modules available online. And what one can do when they visit this site is literally pick and choose the materials one needs for their course at sort of a granular level, at an item level. And I'll show you what that looks like in this site here. So they have a nice landing page. Again, so this is an example where engineering actually hosted this content. We in OLS, we pointed to their website from our projects page here. So this was hosted by engineering, and what they have in their suite of modules, you can look through and you can read more. And within there, so this is a bit of a light module, they include some storyline files in this one for a person to use and adapt for their own. If I go to this module here, they provide a little bit more, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, they actually provide image files. They provide, again, some storyline files. We'll talk about storyline in a minute. But they actually package individual items for a user to use. And it's right here on this site to view and test. So you can see, for example, this mathematics site where they created the whole course or the suite of modules in a learning management system. You can provide some guidance around them, but you can't see what's going on. You can't see, you know, what is in each module. You can't just browse what it looks like. The asset library, for example, in engineering, you can actually download these files. You can look at what they look like. You can download a storyline file instead of a whole course and launch it and see what it looks like. And so, you know, there's two different sort of ways of thinking about how you want to share your content with that. And what we want to talk about today is this major decision. Regardless of what you do, or perhaps a bit, especially if one goes with the LMS export, we do suggest, since this is a lot of content, it's a whole full course, we do suggest providing and working with an instructor guide of some sorts to help others understand your content and the context of how the course is designed. You know, depending on how you share your content, one of these two ways, or maybe somewhere in between, you might want a more detailed guide to, you know, to guide instructors, to guide your peers and colleagues on how they can reuse, adapt, and adopt the work. So, for example, if you consider the adopter, the user cannot browse a full LMS export. What they need to do is they can read the description, but they'd have to download that full exported file, that full IMSCC file, and then import it into their LMS. Once it's in their LMS, you know, they can click through and see how it works, but, you know, does your design strategy support their context? And one of the questions, of course, is when we talk about reuse, does one need to use the whole course or just one unit? It may be a colleague at Queen's is really interested in, you know, Unit 2, Module 2 of your course, which is a fine use case. But, you know, what does that mean for that user then? And indeed, a common cartridge format upon import does allow one to choose what content to import. For instance, Week 2, Module 2. But these are interesting things to consider. So an instructor guide can let users know what to expect in the content package, how it was designed, and it's based on the workshop we're running today. We're talking about in the first part our outcomes, our assessments, and our activities. You know, we're scaffolding the assignments, we're checking for alignment, and that's basically what we're you know, that's what you're talking about when we talk about the design of the course. So I want to do a quick pause and a quick poll here. Which one of these presentation formats so far is resonating with you? What packing strategy are you thinking of so far? Or if you haven't thought of it, what seems to be the idea? Are you thinking you're going to build in the LMS for an export, or are you thinking asset library to zip up and share? You should be able to see the poll right now. Oh, wow, interesting. So with 9 votes, which is probably most of the SMEs here, it's about half and half, or maybe it just inched over to building Quarkus. So that's very interesting. Very, very fascinating. So yeah, so it's interesting. You know, again, there's no right or wrong way. It's just a matter of thinking about the user, thinking about your context, and thinking about how you want to build, which does come to this building blocks or ready to use strategy. So the pros and cons of this. So we use this metaphor of Lego building blocks, versus sort of fully baked, sort of already done or already built. And something to hold in your mind are the pros and cons of how these are assembled and shared. If it's an asset library of individual items or a fully baked, a fully formed thing that was built as a course. So some considerations for you are the effort and cost to build. Is it a bit more to think about an asset library versus just kind of using Quarkus to build out for you. But again, the flexibilities for others to use your selected parts. A success story is, if a user even wants to use one chapter, one unit, let's say, that's showing, what the ministry wants, what eCampus wants, that collaboration, that digital first, people sharing and adopting. But then there's also, there's convenience. There's the ready to go-ness of it for both you. It's ready to go for your course if you built it in Quarkus, and the adopter. Maybe this fits their context perfectly and they can take it and just get ready to go. Just use it. They don't have to rethink. Sustainability is something to think about. Sort of something that's fully baked, if you will, might be a little harder to sustain with edits and then resharing. If you have to tweak, one date on a slide or one sentence in a reading, what does that mean for updating that whole course content, exporting it once again, etc. Versus an asset library? Well, then you only have to share, change one PowerPoint, for example. But of course, there's also the planned uses. Is it going to be used primarily with an LMS or not? Or maybe someone else is going to use these for auxiliary resources. So it's a fascinating thing. And again, we're talking about a full course, so it's a big chunk to think about. And we just want to open up to the group quickly for a minute here. The sort of discussion, chicken or egg. What do you do first? Is it about the sharing, or is it about the design? What do you think about first? But if you had to think, and to go back with your groups as well later, who's reusing your course content and how? Think about that. Think about these reuser stories, how other people are going to take your content. And again, what makes most sense for packaging your project? So we wanted to open it up to the whole group here. You can just raise your hand and unmute your mic. What are people thinking? We did a quick anonymous poll, but how are people envisioning people using their content, or how were you expecting to share it? What makes sense for your project? What are people thinking? Anyone at all?
I could say something.
Yeah.
I liked that. Sorry, my screen got blurry. I liked the engineering drawings example you gave, and would love to do something like that, which is more, I guess, modular, where each chapter or module or whatever is available individually, like just on a web page even, and people could just take whatever content they want. But then I'd have to figure out where to host all that.
Yeah, admittedly, that's a big one. So and not to be discouraging or show you things that are impossible, but yeah, it's this was hosted by engineering. We unfortunately OLS cannot, but yeah, this modular idea that you noted is exactly that. You're able to go through and do. So that's interesting. Any other thoughts? I think maybe I see another hand up.
Yeah, I have my hand up. Will, actually, I just had an idea. We're kind of brainstorming here a little bit, but riffing on Francis's need for a hosting, because the hosting is not an eligible expense, nor something that we plan for in proposals. But one sort of, this is a roundabout way to get at it, but we have open textbook platforms, Pressbooks. But if you didn't use it for a textbook and instead you used it as a hosting location where you created sort of modules as chapters and linked out to the resources that were hosted in, at some location, that actually aligns closely with what eCampus Ontario, their existing models for sharing content. And so it could be an odd hosting solution to use Pressbooks to host a course, which sounds sort of contradictory. Why am I using an open textbook platform to host a course? But we could get creative.
Yeah. And I know there's a chat here from Martina, which is actually a very interesting one, about, is there a way for modular export from Quarkus, or do we build everything in the sandbox and only export this as a whole? So it is interesting though, Martina and everybody, that The other way, to be fair, that it's a good point. The other way one could do this, if you planned ahead enough, you could build. I'm going to use. I'll use week content for just for sake of it. But let's say you built week 1, but before building week 2, if you built out week 1, you could export that. All the content in Quarkus would be that week 1, because basically it's a little odd, but it is more or less an all or nothing. But we have done this before where, in another example, where I was doing some testing, and what I did was I built out week 1, exported that. So that was week 1's content, then deleted, emptied out everything in the course, and then built week 2. So built week 2 out as one would expect, and then exported that, and then once again deleted all of that. And one could do that to provide that. So that's a good point, Martina. That would be a bit of work, a bit of thinking ahead, but one could do that. And then the interesting thing is, upon import, one can import multiple files. One can import and select what they need. So that could be another way to do it. Let me test that I'm not lying to you, that one could say import potentially, let's say 8 different weeks or 12 different weeks for that matter. But one could do that. That's a good point, Martina. Thank you. Yeah. And Jessica's saying, yeah, maybe some sort of various. And indeed, you could build the bulk of your course, and then in Quarkus, for example, and then also provide a bit of an asset library. To Francis's question, Laurie, I'm not sure if we know for sure if we can. Do you have any more? Do you have any news or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a question we need to consult with ACT, whether these can be provisioned, or whether it'll be a local ask with your local ed tech through your divisional contacts. So I don't know how those will be provisioned, but I think that it's an important tool for building these out that we're going to have to find our way to provision.
Yeah. So yeah, that's great. Thanks so much. Thanks for the great questions and great discussion. It's a big one. It's a big one to think about. Again, because does that help inform your design decisions, or does it come secondary after your design decisions on how you're going to share? So that's the main bit about probably our main 2 packaging, basic packaging strategies, how we can share our content. But what we also want to kind of dive into a bit here was some of the ways then that we can sort of help provide a bit of lift on how you can start sort of storyboarding, designing, and thinking about creating and developing content, knowing how it's going to be packaged, especially with big teams. There's a few things to think about. So we actually this is taking a bit of a step back and thinking about storyboarding, thinking about the content you want to share, how it's laid out, and this kind of attaches to the scaffolding portion of the activity we did in our first session today. So when we think about a typical unit or module in a course, as we shared in the first section, and most of us probably do this sort of automatically, but a typical, when you're building out your course, when you switch gears to do a different unit, you typically have some sort of introduction, some sort of hook that introduces your students, your learners, to what that module, what that week is going to be about. You typically provide some learning outcomes, and here it's all the more important to provide learning outcomes since this is online, since it's shared, so people can see what's going to happen. And then of course you have your module content, the content itself now, and we're going to dig deep into today a little bit about the content pieces you might explore and use. You have some knowledge checks, some assessments, some feedback, some formative feedback to keep students engaged and checking and self-checking themselves. And then, yeah, as you wrap up, there's the content recap, some practice, some application, the formative and then the summative assessment. And somewhere in there, you might have some extra practice, some extra resources. So we looked at this a little in our part 1 today, where Lori showed, when we align things and scaffold things, these things kind of show up in that scaffold. We have our hook and maybe a video lecturette to start things. We have some quiz questions to test for understanding. Then we get into the content. Maybe it's an interactive learning object. Then maybe there's a problem set at the end. So that's what we want to talk about a little bit, how we can, take what this unit looks like and how can we storyboard that? How can we help plan that and work with each other, with your colleagues and with your teams to design your content and track your content. Whatever you end up using, thinking about the learner experience is important. And, you can ask yourself how detailed you need this to be, whether you want basics or specifics of interactions, of how things work, thinking about your image sources. But whatever you end up doing, and some of you might be using a bit more interactivity than others. I know some people have talked about using e-authoring software like Articulate Storyline, which creates sort of interactive pieces, and we're going to look at that a little later. H5P is another interactive content builder for interesting quizzing options. As you create this and working with your team, we just want to provide a few storyboards that you may or may not use, or may not find useful for helping track and build out this content as you package it up. An example we provided on the VLS support page is a PowerPoint template that looks like this, where as you work through your modules with your colleagues or with yourself, you can think about adding the visual, adding a description of what you're looking at, whether it's a video or if you're talking about delving into an image or something like that. You can, provide the voice, what you're going to use for the voiceover, the text. You can talk about any interactions. You can give notes. So it's just a sort of a standard little storyboard piece. This might be useful specifically if you are going to integrate some e-learning material or e-authored software like Storyline or H5P. Another one is just Word, and we provide a link to a Word template for helping to track. Again, if you're looking at a module or some scenes in your learning, you can talk about what the slide contains. Again, we note things like narration. If you're creating video, if you're creating text or voiceover, having that text written up is useful for yourself and for your colleagues. So when you're presenting your material, you have a voice, you have a text to speak to, and of course it's also great for accessibility. Taking that in mind, and we're going to have a future webinar on accessible and universal design for learning, but having these things are useful up front. So we provided a PowerPoint template and a Word template. Of course, you can just build things out yourself in PowerPoint. So this is an example of, if you are trying to track your video content, you might just create a PowerPoint slide with some notes about, what the video link leads to, what module it's for, what the title is, your link to the YouTube video, maybe some notes for yourself for an instructor guide that says, this module 3 video might be cross-referenced in module 4. So just using PowerPoint is can be a great way to help track your content. Another example, I mentioned H5P, and I'm going to demonstrate and show you H5P if you haven't heard of it shortly. But this is an example of an interactive widget, an interactive content piece built through H5P. It's the timeline feature. So it's another example. If you create an H5P piece, an interactive sort of widget, you can, again, track this in something like PowerPoint with the module, with the link to the thing, any notes around it. And a final one is just an example of reflection. Maybe, we suggest and have seen great use of reflection prompts. So if you think about your reflection, think about where it might sit, think about a title, think about the text for it. But again, we just wanted to show, different ways you might track your content and share that content with your peers and colleagues. Regardless of how you start developing and designing content and sharing content between yourselves and thinking about how you're sharing it broadly, we do recommend keeping a parallel spreadsheet, or at least a spreadsheet, to track your asset development, your videos, your PowerPoints, etc. decide what will be shared, decide where it will be archived. So you have to think and think to yourself, are you going to share and save just, the primary file you're going to share out to eCamps Ontario? Do you yourselves want to keep every file, every edited version? These are things to think about, both because of space and how you set up your asset tracking. So if you create a PowerPoint, and version 1 is, has a few errors, so then you have version 2, version 3. From previous projects, we have seen iterations, going up to version 10. So thinking about this in advance will just help sort of your project management and help think about how you're going to track and share this content. Because what do you want to keep? All of the versions or just the final version? Because some of them might be useful in different contexts. And again, where to store? Obviously, we here at U of T have the full suite of Office 365 tools. So one can use Teams, set up Teams folder, a Teams space for you and your colleagues and collaborators, or OneDrive. So thinking about these things in advance now is going to be very handy for later as you build out these things, and especially if you're considering sharing an asset library as your packaging strategy, having this nicely organized is going to go a long way for that. An example in that shared folder context, this is a couple of quick screenshots from a project we worked on OLS with a suite of experiential learning modules. We decided to use Teams to host this, and what we decided to do for our module assets these are for a suite of 9 modules. We had images and videos in its own folder, so we put all image and all video links according to the specific module in its own folder. We had a folder for the instructor guides. We had a folder for the PowerPoint files. We created these also in Storyline, and again, I'll show this a little bit later. So we kept the Storyline files separate, supplementary resources separate, and the little arrow shows if you dug down, of course, in the Storyline modules, we kept for each module the story file and the zipped content for sharing. So do think about that. Think about your storage requirements. Think about how you want to track your assets, what assets you want to track, and how you're going to share with your team. Again, it's a great way for your own organization, but it also makes sense for when you are building your content and sharing your content and packaging it, so you know where things go as you're building out in Quarkus or you're sharing your asset library. Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about storyboarding. We've talked a little bit about how you might share and store your material across teams. So going back to the storyboard with your learning, with your module content, your practice, your assessment, and stuff like that, what kind of interactive components can you integrate in your material? What can we share? What can we do? So we did want to provide some things for you to think about what you can add to your course content that can be shared across eCamps Ontario, and how to decide on these things. Of course, and this goes back to our first session when we talked about active learning strategies. All of these things are great for active learning, for interactivity, for engaging students. Naturally, we have our quiz questions. We have videos that are going to be, of course, highly used, as well as PowerPoints and readings. Reflections, journal prompts are very useful. Different sort of formats of authentic learning. Now, we use that as a heading, but there's do-it-yourself experiments we've seen in the past, case studies, different scenarios, and virtual field trips are all great to provide some authentic learning. Simulations, things built out with H5P, whether they're adapted or if you built from scratch, can be added. And of course, there's more. So, but let's take a look here. So quiz tools, of course, you can build quizzes in Quarkus. And this is one of those things, again, if you're building this out in your LMS, maybe Quarkus does the job, Canvas does the job. You have your basic MCQs, you have your true false, you have your, select one or many or one word answer. These things you can create right in the LMS. When you export, they can be imported and used in other course contexts. There's a question sort of standard that gets transferred across with that. So when you're thinking about assessment pieces, they can be built to be shared in this way. If you are using something like an e-learning software like Storyline, it has all those quote-unquote basic quizzing options that Quarkus has, but it also has more interactive pieces, different things that Quarkus can't do natively, like different sort of drop-down options, drag and drop, timelines, and branching. The thing about Storyline, it's a great software, and I will show some examples of this, but it is takes a little more skill to author, to create. It is a specialized software that that one needs to purchase. I have to review the Mac question. It is true it was not once for Mac. I think they may have a version, but there is also Adobe Captivate. It's another e-learning software, which is for Mac. So Captivate's absolutely fine, and Camtasia can do different things. To be fair, that's okay. Thank you, thank you, Francis. So it is still not. But yeah. So Storyline, it is an example of an e-authored piece, but it's not the only one. But the nice thing about that, if you're using quizzing with something like Storyline, it can be trackable when integrated into an LMS, learning management system. Which is to say, you can get the results. You can see a student scored 100%, for example, or if it's based on did they look at it, it'll give a 1 or a 0 based on if they did it or not. So it's a little more trackable. We've mentioned H5P. Oh, sorry, in Pressbooks doesn't really matter. H5P can be put on a website. H5P can be put in your courses. It's basically an embed code, like an iframe that can be placed anywhere. It also has all sorts of interactive type of quizzing options. The interesting thing about H5P, it's a little more easy to learn. And the library of templates that they provide, they actually provide a lot of examples. One can literally like copy that example. If you see a quiz you really like, some interactive content you like, but maybe all you need to do is change an image or just change one answer, you can actually copy and just do those granular edits. If someone else has created it, you can easily adapt. So it's a little easier to learn, but the thing is it's not trackable. You can't kind of get a score from it. So it's great for interactivity, it's great for practice, it's great for formative feedback, but if you need or want to track, it's not trackable. But there's a lot of quizzing options you can do to build out into your course. Of course, there's video and video production, and we are going to elaborate on some of this in our follow-up webinars in the future on packaging strategy details. But we provide a link from engineering that has an example resourcing guide, the different video styles, and we've seen many great styles in use of video in the past. But you do have to consider the production costs and creation. But we have seen also video, you can use it as standalone. You can use it, of course, for your course delivery, your course content, but what else do you want to do? Do you want to add inline questions? Do you want to embed it in another sort of sequence, for instance, in Storyline or Captivate? And do you want to use just snippets to introduce and maybe provide a wrap-up for online assignments? Thinking about video just beyond the course delivery, the course content, there are a lot of options you can do to make it more enriching and interactive for your students, especially, again, knowing this is online and at a distance. We talked about reflection in journal prompts. This is an example from Indigenous Ways of Knowing that integrated reflection throughout their modules, a great way for students to pause, to reflect, to test for understanding. This is an example image from Storyline that they created. And then there's authentic learning. This is an example from UTSC that provides basically a virtual field trip. And I'm going to demonstrate this in a minute. And simulations and widgets, different ways, things that may be already out there or something you might design to add that interactivity. I'm going to demonstrate this in a moment for you. And then H5P specifically can help with some of this. So I wanted to discuss those, but I also wanted to show you a little bit of what I was talking about. So this example about a widget, this was from a previous funded project, and this is an interesting thing that somebody made. A user can actually manipulate pieces in this little widget. This is data visualization literacy, and they can take a user can take live samples and see how things interact, see how the things like means and variance change by interacting with it, taking new samples and seeing what happens. So this is an example of something that another project created, but these are out there. These are out there for you to also borrow. These are something you can integrate into your course, and something then that if you linked out to and provide some guidance in an instructor guide, you can include things like this. I've been talking about storyline and experiential learning modules. This is an example from another project where most of the content we created in these sort of weeded storyline, but Adobe Captivate is another example. So we created a bunch of different modules here, and I'll open one here in storyline, and you can see here this whole sort of interactive object created packages things up. One can access resources you can create in the tab up top, and a user kind of like a course, right, can navigate through a module, and it's sort of its own structured learning content to guide a learner through the content. And most of these can include different pop-outs, different branching scenarios, links to other activities. In this case, we have ways to just add text for reflection. We added a print notes for a user to print the notes to reflect on what they're doing. So you can do kind of rich interactive things with something like an e-authoring software. And again, you can import these into the LMS, you can import these into Quarkus and provide these to your potential adapters and adopters. I also mentioned that an authentic learning experience with UTSC with a virtual field trip. This is an example page where, yes, some of our colleagues might be familiar with this, where a user goes through, there's interactive pieces here to look at. There's all sorts of information, and the user can take a virtual field trip around Ontario. They can see all sorts of different things. It's a great example. And I just noticed I don't have my H5P link up yet, with apologies. But if you go to h5p.org, there's content type and applications. H5P, you can do so many content types, different quizzes. I think I mentioned a timeline earlier. There are drag and drops. There are different sort of hotspot things. Now, not all are accessible, and do look at accessibility. And I think we can share a link later that helps show what pieces are accessible. Hotspots, if I'm not mistaken, are not accessible. Drag and drop are accessible by keyboard. And anything you create in here, anything you create can actually be embedded into, for example, Pressbooks, into Quarkus or on a website. I showed, for instance, timeline earlier. This page shows examples, but you can go through the history of strawberries. You can add images, you can add notes, you can add links to things. You can make something a little more rich. And you can imagine if you're packaging content to share, if you're packaging your course content to share, if you built this out, for example, in Quarkus, this might be 10 different pages or a whole bunch of different links on one page. That might be cumbersome to share or navigate for another user. If you built, and we're not saying you have to, it's just an example that, building something out in something like Storyline or H5P offers different ways to provide interactivity, to package your content, to share your content. So we just want to share some examples and just get you thinking. Do what's right for your context, right? We talked in the first part. Go with your student learning outcomes. The outcomes come first, and from your outcomes, you think about your assessment and activities. Don't try to shoehorn something in. Don't. Of course, we're not telling you to make H5P but if it does seem to suit your design context, if it goes with your outcomes, it might be something worth exploring. You know what? I think for the time's sake, because we have 10 minutes left, I'll just ask you to hold this in your head. But you know, think later, have a look through the face example video formats, and consider what kind of videos you might want to use. And based on this, going back to your teams, and again, holding in your head, what kind of interact.
Well, we lost your audio, I think, there, Will. Just checking. Am I the only one who can't hear Will, or is that widespread?
No, that's right, Lori. Will seems to have dropped off.
Okay, well, I'll just pick up. Just looking at this video formats, what are we doing here? Yeah, I think we'll just, no, I can't advance the slide. I do have a copy of his slides. Whoop, we seem to have lost them. Let's see what I can do here. Gonna take over and make my way along here. I can move us to where we were. Let's move to this. Can you see that and hear me okay? Talking about sharing strategies just to wrap up today.
Yeah, that looks fine. It looks like we've actually lost Will from the meeting full stop.
Okay, that's okay. I'll just pick up and carry on. We're a team. You should see us work together. Here we go. So we're talking a little bit more just to wrap up about the project requirements, just to remind ourselves and how we can meet the funder requirements. So we actually already touched on the VLS principles. They're just repeated here about the things that the funder's looking for. I showed you the graphic in part 1. In particular, Francis had a question earlier about the licensing and the availability. And so there is a requirement and something new that eCampus Ontario has introduced called an Ontario Public Post-Secondary, an Ontario Commons. And in this license, it's a version of Creative Commons. However, it is restricting access to the resources to Ontario post-secondary institutions specifically, and would allow those institutions to copy the work and adapt the work. So that's the sort of flexibility that they're looking for. The conditions being that the original author is credited and it's only used as part of a publicly offered credit or non-credit course or program. So we do have this expectation. This is sort of what I would call the minimum obligation. This is the sort of the most constraining licensing model that they will accept, and they will expect this as a minimum to be the licensing for what's contributed. Now, of course, we are welcome to do more. So we are welcome to have it as a Creative Commons license broadly and have it not limited to Ontario. Getting a little back channel. I'm not sure if we can mute our mics. Let's see, let me just do a little mute here. So this is, in terms of constraining the use, it's really determined by the license. So you may choose to use this Ontario Commons license that they are suggesting, but they are also encouraging broader sharing because philosophically, if we've gone to all the trouble of putting this together, it still, you know, the possible benefit to others beyond Ontario is great, and to help students everywhere globally potentially have access to low cost, high quality materials. Are there any questions about that? I'm trying to watch the chat here at the same time. Francis says that's great. Okay, and let me see here. So I was just mentioning this, I'm just repeating, this is the minimum. Anything that we contribute has to be, you know, the files have to be contributed under this license. So they are looking for us to share the files. So just to also repeat, it's not offering the course At U of T, it's sharing the content. So what your contract is asking you to do is share the licensed content. So that packaging piece is why we've had so much emphasis on that and how we're going to export that. Helen's asked about the embargo. The embargo is still in place, unfortunately. And so we're just waiting. We don't have any news on that. I'm doing PowerPoint karaoke here, presenting Will's material. So, here's talking about sharing. So one of the things that we can do is think about both how you want to use it at U of T and how other people, can use it at other institutions. So we may have a combination where you create a version to share. It's more generic. It's more, it doesn't have any, sort of U of T logos or references to U of T resources in it. It's more generic, but then you can also make a copy of it. In a way, you're adapting your own course for your own use. So you have a slightly different version of it that's very specific to U of T. So we can have sort of a scenario where we're in a sense adapting our own work. So we have the two examples here mentioned again. And finally, just to wrap up, some of the strategies that we suggest, these are just general principles for supporting reuse, using standard content formats that we've been talking about, allowing for adaptation. The more specific it is with institution specific or sort of page references or dates or anything like that is obviously going to be a huge problem. Course codes, contextual titles, avoid those to make it easy to use. And then we also talked in part 1 about involving others in the planning, and that the engagement with others and collaboration is actually a really important factor to ensuring reuse down the line. And it's just about 12 o'clock. And so our next steps, just to remind you, we have a number of webinars coming up. The next one is on Tuesday next week. It's more about packaging, H5P, things like that. We will have follow-up meetings with each team. And before the end of the month, we will be reaching out to set up a scheduled rendezvous with you and your team to check in on how your plans are going to get everyone on a good track started and having the resources and their key questions all resolved. And then also financial reporting information. We're still waiting for that. Henry's on the call, and I don't think we have any news on that yet. We're waiting to hear more about what the details would be. Looking back into the chat, are there any unresolved questions? Will's answered Martina's questions. Yeah, I think he's answered them all there. Are there any more questions? We're just about at the top of the hour, and I'll just open it up. If there's anything that still on your mind or you want us to follow up on, we are quite flexible. In the past, we'll set up pop-up webinars if there's even, a half a dozen people who want to chat about something. It's easier for us to get together and share intel than have 6 conversations. So we often set up quick webinars. So I encourage you to both contact us if you have questions and concerns, because we're here to help, and let us know if there's areas of support where you think you'd like to see more resources. Throughout the day today, we've had a few asks, and so we will tune our follow-up message to you and include resources that seem like they'd be particularly helpful based on the feedback that we've received from you. Okay. So I believe that is it for part 2. I'm sure you're all feeling like there's a lot of information coming at you like a fire hose here and the end of a busy term. But we will